Hello, everybody. So we're starting the panel, please. Thank you so much for attending and for taking your seats. Yes, I'm just like waiting for a couple of people. So in this session, we will be talking about how do we build a stronger ecosystem, specifically in the field of peace building, and what does it actually take in these challenging days that we are facing. And basically, the sustaining peace, as the UN puts it, should be broadly understood as a goal and a process, underpinned by the people-centered approach of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and grounded in international human rights law and standards. In this session, we will be discussing the ecosystem for creating sustainable peace, considering lessons from the past and for the future. Not only that, but also looking at the unusual suspects, including the role of religion in peace building, the challenges that the Palestinians face to join the peace building, but also where are the women and what is the role of women, and finally, the role of the Palestinians within Israeli citizenship. So today we have an excellent panel drawn from civil society that can help us navigate through some of these questions we are asking. Thank you so much for coming here today and agreeing to speak on this panel. I'm going to introduce each one of you, if you allow me, and then we are going to start our discussion. So I'll start with Dr. Nida Shoughry. She is the co-director of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 project at Itakh-Ma'aki, Women Lawyers for Social Justice. Dr. Shoughry is a lecturer and researcher in the fields of Israeli-Palestinian conflict and social movement theory, a former journalist and an activist committed to human rights and cultural diversity. She holds a PhD in international politics and master's degree in journalism, a Fulbrighter and a graduate of the prestigious Mandel Program for Social Leadership. She is the author of the book Israeli-Arab Political Mobilization Between Acquiescence, Participation, and Resistance. That's how you know it's a really smart book. Yeah. Our second speaker is Mr. Mohammed Darawshe. Mr. Darawshe is considered as a leading political analyst and expert on Jewish-Arab relations inside Israel. He has been the director of the Center for Shared Society at Givat Haviva since January 2014. He served as a member of the three-sector roundtable at the Prime Minister's office and on the strategic planning team of the Authority for Economic Development of Arab sector at the Prime Minister's office. He is also a research fellow at Hartman Institute and the Robert Bosch Academy. We also have Dr. Alick Isaacs. Dr. Alick Isaacs is the co-director of Siach Shalom, Talking Peace, and a lecturer at the Hebrew University. Dr. Isaacs wrote a book called A Prophetic Peace, Judaism, Religion, and Politics, and has just published a new book called Putting God First, Jewish Humanism After Heidegger. Is that the name of a person?
Yes, the name of a person.
Yes, thank you. We also have Dr. Gershon Baskin with us. Is currently the Israel-Palestine director of the Holy Land Bond. He was the initiator of the secret direct back channel between Israel and Hamas that successfully negotiated the release of the abducted Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit. From 1988 to 2011, Dr. Baskin was the Israeli co-director and founder of the Israel-Palestine Center for Research and Information, IPCRI. Under the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, he served as a special advisor on the Israeli-Palestinian peace process to a secret team of intelligence officers established by Rabin. Last but not least, my final and youngest speaker on the panel, Mohammed, Mr. Mohammed Attira. He received his bachelor's degree in energy and environment engineering from Najah University in Nablus, during which he helped found the first chapter of the Association of Energy Engineers in Palestine. Mohammed has 11 years of experience working and participating in international affairs programs and is also a certified dialogue and conflict transformation facilitator. So welcome to you all. Once again, thank you so much for agreeing to join this panel. So we thought, first of all, that it's important for us as audience to basically set the scene between the past and what is happening today in terms of peace building. So to begin this setting of the past, kind of like the scene, we would like to start with Dr. Baskin and Mr. Darawshe. And I would like to basically ask you, having more than 20 years of experience in this field, can you share with us what were the factors that made it possible, peace building 20 years ago? Was it even possible? Was it challenging or not? Did it even happen?
Thank you, Naveen, and thank you, everyone. 45 years of experience in the field, but I'll relate to the period of the last 25, 30 years. In 1988, I set out to create a joint Israeli-Palestinian public policy think tank and do tank, which we called IPCRI, Israel-Palestine Center for Research and Information. The guiding principles that led to that work, even though conditions were very different then than they are today, I think, for me, remain the same guiding principles on how to try to succeed in the very challenging field. I would say that the major difference, and this is a very large difference between 1988 in the 4th month of the first Intifada when I started IPCRI from today, is that in 1988 we had a lot more hope than we have today. And that is a huge difference in terms of motivating people to take action. But the conditions that we sought to create were the following. The work was done jointly from the outset. I worked with a Palestinian partner. We created a joint institution that was housed in the same office. We worked side by side for decades on parity and equality in decision-making, in fundraising, in policy development, in the allocation of money and taking full responsibility. We created a platform that then we thought would bring everyone to the table. We started from the position of 2 states for 2 people. And we thought that we needed to put the solution on the table from the beginning and to work backwards on how do we get there. Today, I would say the challenge with that is that there is probably no longer a viability for a 2-state solution. Bringing a 2-state solution as the platform, the unifying platform to the table today is not relevant, at least for the majority of young Israelis and young Palestinians. So where do we find the unifying platform? I'll get to that in a moment. The third condition that was necessary in bringing people together, and I think is even more necessary today, was to guaranteeing people safety. The anti-normalization movement began in earnest about 15 years ago. But at that time, people got threatening letters or threatening phone calls. They were threatened with violence, but violence was never used. That is not the case today. People on the Palestinian side who engage in joint activities often face real violence. Threats are real. So the need to provide a guaranteed safe environment, a location, a venue, and if need be, secrecy, is compounded today by the political realities in Israel and Palestine even more than it was before. Sometimes that makes our work very difficult. I am today running 3 secret back channels between very important Israelis and Palestinians. I can say nothing more about it than what I just said. Because if I say anything more, it won't happen. and the people who are participating won't participate. So sometimes the case is real that we need to provide secrecy. When it's not necessary to provide secrecy, we have to be conscious all the time about protecting the people who are taking the risk to participate. Now, with regard to the shared platform, I would say that was said in the first panel here this morning, the organizing principle of bringing Israelis and Palestinians together for political work, not necessarily for sport or for health activities, but for political work, is the reality that we need to come back to the table again and figure out how we're going to live together on this land between the river and the sea, whether it's 1 state, 2 states, 3 states, 10 states. That's much less important than defining the principles under which we will live together on this land. The political reality that will develop as a consequence of Israelis and Palestinians sitting at the table together and figuring out how to do it. The organizing principle in my mind is no longer telling people we support a 2-state solution. It doesn't work anymore, and it's probably not viable. So we need, and maybe what I'm suggesting is not the organizing principle that will bring people to the table. It's very difficult. But you need an organizing principle. It has to be done together. It can't be Israelis inviting Palestinians all the time. It has to be Palestinians and Israelis working together as a joint team, creating the confidence and the trust with the people that we're trying to bring together, and that organizing principle.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Darawshe, what can you tell us about your experience? 20 years ago, more than that?
Again, 45 years ago, together with Gershon, we were together in the very early stages. I think if we want to look into time travel, if you want to look at our work and give it some kind of a historic perspective, I think what the main lesson is professionalize our work. We start a lot of the NGOs in this room and all the NGOs that happened before. I mean, earlier in the morning we spoke about, someone said that there are 160 organizations who are members of MEP, of all MEP. I think maybe only 20 existed about 45 years ago or maybe 20 years ago, and 180 were deleted. Many organizations mushroom when there is money, MEPA or EU, and when the money after 2-3 years when the money dries, they also go to something else. Very few organizations and projects actually maintain life throughout that time. And mainly it's organizations that chose to professionalize themselves and move from the stage of doing good work because it's good work, and everyone in this room is doing good work. There's no question that it's good work. But good work means that, one, you need to evaluate what you do, see how effective it is. It's not just about good work, but it's about effectiveness. And I do invite everyone here really to think about how can you be effective. And effective moves at least in 2 directions. One is the political nature of the work, and the second is the social economic nature of the work. And here on the social economic, and that's where most organizations of civil society organizations are working in, we know that social contact theory is nice. We come, we eat hummus together, and we completely disregard the conflict, and we only focus on humanizing each other and focus on how can we diffuse stereotypes and issues like that. That's nice. But we have a syndrome called returning home. We go home and we go back to our old perspectives, and the impact of these meetings evaporate. The other strategy that we use, and still today, is the political dialogue or narrative debate or identity debate. We dialogue. Again, that really seems to be less effective today, because dialogue mostly you tend, and we heard it from one of the ambassadors, he said, even if we agree to disagree. Okay, what's good about agreeing to disagree? So we have 2 narratives, 2 perspectives, but we do not have a common denominator that we agree on. You need to find a common denominator. The third, and I think which is most effective strategy that we've learned over time, and it came from evaluation, is to focus on mutual interests. What's called in conflict resolution theory the superordinate goal theory, where you identify mutual interests that even if you're stuck politically, let's call it the vertical dimension, at least on the social, on the horizontal dimension, social, economic issues, you're able to accumulate successful islands of success. You're able to accumulate successes, and that's what gives you a proper foundation to be able to sustain programs for time, because with dialogue you get exhausted very quickly. With dialogue you understand, okay, as long as we do not talk about, as long as we talk about the problems, then we understand there's no solution to the Israeli, at least no nearby solution that we can see on the Israeli-Palestinian political front. So we tend to go to the human aspect. So I think that what's most important, what we bring to the table as organizations, as major organizations, is first of all, sustained long-term major programs. One of the, I think the biggest successful programs that I've been involved in is actually learning from the mistakes of the past. So most of the past was focusing on the children. You know, we won the UNESCO Prize for Peace Education for a project called Children Teaching Children. We paired Jewish and Arab classrooms together. Evaluate that 10 years later. Okay, we heard the evaluation today from Accord. Nice. 4 times more than those that are not involved. Really not that significant. It does not create tectonic shift. But where can you create tectonic shift? When we shifted strategy and we said our client is not the child, our client is the teacher. So we started focusing on the teachers, and the teachers become your real agents in the field, and they give you the multiple impact. I initiated the project in 2005, which is called cross-sector teachers, placing Jewish teachers in Arab schools and Arab teachers in Jewish schools. We started with 6 teachers. Do you know how many teachers do we have today? Does anyone here know? No. We have 2,500 cross-sector teachers, 2,000 Arab teachers in Jewish schools, and 500 Jewish teachers in Arab schools. For 93% of the kids that meet these teachers, this is their first ever encounter with the other, 93%. For 68% of them, this transfers their perspective from negative to positive about the culture of the other. Here you're talking magnitude. So it's not just a nice project of 20 people that meet in the back of some kind of a nice hotel. You're talking about 600,000 to 700,000 kids into this program. About 700,000 kids. So the issue is scaling, professionalizing, and scaling can never be just through donor money. Scaling, you have to engage government. If you are not able to engage the government, if you cannot tap into the educational system, if you cannot tap into the industry, if you cannot tap into the media and make them your partner, you'll still remain a nice,
are we there?
Nice small project.
Are we there now? Are we changing the educational system and the media system, at least in Israel?
Well, with 700,000 kids, that's almost 30% of the educational system. It's not there yet. It's not the tectonic shift. We're not at 51% plus. I will tell you that we're beginning to change the system when I have not 2,500 teachers in the cross-sector teachers, but when I have maybe 7,000. So I would say I'm third way into the educational system. Finally, just 2 weeks ago, I was invited to be a part of the commission that is going to rewrite civics education in Israel. As a member of civil society that brings this kind of experience of 40-some years. So they're finally saying civics education needs to be rewrote in Israel. It's not, you cannot continue educating for civic identity the same way you're training right now. For the Jewish sector, you're training super achievers that they feel this is their homeland and they need to flourish in this country. And for the Palestinian Arab citizens, for example, you need to be nice, law-obedient citizens that are grateful that they allow you to live here. You're creating different civic creatures. So most of the programs need institutionalization. If we only stay as nice projects on the side and you do not manage to institutionalize your work within the system, we'll continue to have nice article, maybe even in the Washington Post or the New York Times. But what's the impact on this? What's the scaling? Scaling only government can do. We need to find the proper way to engage with governments.
On that point, if I may comment, so basically you're talking about not coexistence, because coexistence still means that there is this imbalance of power. between a person that, as you mentioned, you are the achiever, you are the owner, you are the supreme, etc., and you are the good law-abiding citizen.
I wrote an article in 2001. I called it the horse and rider syndrome of coexistence. You know, coexistence can be between unequals, and that's a term that is not acceptable between humans. Exactly. It's either we're two horses pulling the same wagon, or we are actually enjoying the ride on the wagon. The horse and rider syndrome, where you have hierarchy, where you can enjoy the same ride, see the same scene, and drink the same water, and at the end of your joyful ride, that's a Jewish-Arab coexistence activity. One goes to the castle and eats a steak, and one goes to the stable and eats hay. That's not. I don't want to be the horse, at least. That's not acceptable as a means for a conflict resolution. That does not resolve conflict. That maybe buys you time, and that time also, and we've seen it from evaluation. Professor Gabi Solomon, the late Professor Gabi Solomon, Professor Itakh-Ma'aki did evaluation, and they give expiration date for this kind of coexistence. The minute you go to your imbalanced status, the impact of those encounters expire very, very quickly.
And if I may just also stress on one very important point that you mentioned, which was around the dialogue programs that we've had previously. The dialogue programs are the exact same reason of why we have the challenge of normalization right now. Because people were getting to know each other, eating hummus and falafel, but then nothing really changed. Instead, we saw the second intifada erupting. So,
and you know, in dialogue, you get to learn a lot. You get to learn about the other. You get to learn about their identity. I think it's good. I think it's important, but it needs to be put in perspective. It doesn't have standalone capacity. If dialogue does not lead towards collaboration on actual programs that are of mutual benefit, it's simply hot air.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. Thank you. I think I'm gonna, Dr. Alick. There's a new challenge coming in, like we're talking about it now. We are seeing demonstrations about it, especially in Israel every single week, the judicial reform that is happening. Is it a threat to the peace building? Is it a new challenge that is added, or can we actually consider it as an opportunity? Since it's actually, making people consider that, democracy doesn't exist with this current occupation.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Before I start, I want to thank you for the horse and the rider. That was great. I'm going to use that one. I'll quote it in your name. Okay. That was great. I'm very pleased to be here. And as I was listening, I've been listening to the discussions and the panels during the course of the day. And one of the questions, this relates to your question, I promise. But one of the questions that has been going around my head, I've just been spinning around my head today, is as people who are working in the peace business, are we supposed to be idealists or realists? And I think it's actually quite a good question, because I think is that better here? I think there's a lot of emphasis on trying to be realists. We need to show there are results. We need to be able to demonstrate our results. We need to be able to show to funders that they paid for X and we gave them X. And we need to be able to demonstrate the effectiveness of everything that we're doing. And there's a side of me that feels that is just not the business that we're in. We're in the business of trying to imagine and make real a reality that is ideal and that is very distant from the way in which we currently spend our lives. And I think one of the differences between an idealist and a realist is that if an idealist looks at an impossible situation, it's not a question of being optimistic. I'm not even sure if it's being hopeful, which is a great distinction between optimistic and hopeful, which Rabbi Sachs famously made. But I think it's about being faithful, and about being faithfthe to the possibility that things that happen are always opportunities. So I've been looking at the situation in Israel with the judicial reform. What I see taking place is probably not the dominant narrative that people see in the news. The thing that has really struck me about the judicial reform is that after the demonstrations are over, people in their hundreds in different places are sitting around in circles and talking to each other. And there's been an absolutely astonishing movement. It started, I think, with people who said, wait a minute, we don't want to be on that side, we don't want to be on that side, we want to sit in the middle, we want to be the glue, we want to create narrative, a third narrative, a narrative of dialogue between the sides, which in and of itself is wonderful. And lots of my friends were, in these tents and hunger strikes and all sorts of things to say, we want dialogue, we want dialogue. But the thing that I thought was so fantastic was that people on either side of the demonstrations, not just the people who were trying to be in the middle, were realizing that we're not going to win this with realism. We're not going to win this with a power struggle in which we're going to evolve victorious. Sometimes the last thing you want in a fight is to come out as the victor. That's the biggest defeat. And people are reaching out and saying we need to figure out how we can create an impossible situation, which is the situation of people who feel very deeply resentful of one another, are very, very angry at one another, feel that if the other one gets his or her way, then I won't be able to continue living in this country. And even so, let's sit down and talk. And not because we're ever going to have any hope of reaching agreement, and not because I'm ever going to be able to convince you of anything, but because I think it will be good for my soul. I think something will happen to me. I think I will grow. I think I'll become a bigger person. A more spiritually adept person, a person who's more capable of listening. And I think there is a movement taking place in Israel. I know just from the perspective of my job and what I do as one of the co-directors of Siach Shalom, which basically specializes in bringing people who don't want to sit together in the same room and getting them together in the same room. But we are overwhelmed, and I know that there are many other organizations that are overwhelmed, and I know from my connections with what's going on in the office of the President of the State of Israel that they're also overwhelmed. People are reaching out and saying we want to talk to each other. We don't think we can win without creating an environment in which we can talk to each other. So I see that as a tremendously positive and hopeful development. The question is, and I think this is what you're asking, does that energy translate into Israelis of all different sorts and Palestinians of all different sorts saying, this is the way to address problems. This is the way to make a difference. I don't know if it can be measurable. I don't know if it can be defined as realistic, but I do know that it's not hot air. I think another word for hot air is breath. And breath in Hebrew is neshama. And that's soul. I don't think it's hot air at all. I think when people talk to each other, I think that's one of the most powerful things that can happen in the world. I think it's one of the most transformative experiences that people can have in the world. And I deeply believe in it and in paying attention to the transformations that it can produce, even if these transformations don't immediately turn into a policy, even if they don't immediately turn into an agenda. Because I think if the solution to the problem that we are dealing with was obvious to us already, we'd have done it by now. If we don't have a creative, transformative interaction with one another, I don't think we're ever going to get to a place of vision where we can have a new ideal. And I think that's what we need. So just to say very briefly, as a summary, I'm very hopeful about the current situation, or I'm very faithful about the current situation, but I think work needs to be done to channel the energies that this protest has created, the dialogue energies, and to make sure that they impact on Israeli-Palestinian relations and not just on the debates between the right and the left in Israel.
But can that debate of the Palestinian and the Israeli relationship actually create more tense Israeli society and more kind of conflict within the Israeli society? People like in the anti-occupation blog who are saying, sorry, but democracy does not exist with occupation. And they're raising the Palestinian flag, and the last Saturday, some of these blocks were actually attacked by throwing stones at them. Because now is not the right time. Why are you raising the Palestinian flag? And the Palestinian flag is such a big threat within the Israeli society right now. The Palestinian identity is a big threat. Can this basically debate actually create more divide within the own Israeli society, or can it actually bring them closer to solving and ending the status quo?
I'm getting a rebound. It of course can go either way, and the question is what will define whether it goes north or south. The rule of thumb, as far as I'm concerned, is not how good people are at saying what they believe, but how good they are at listening to what other people believe. And I think that when you are in an environment in which there is no listening, and dialogue and discussion and debate is replaced with grandstanding. I've got nothing against waving flags, by the way, but I don't think it's enough. And I think that an environment in which people are listening outside of their comforts, outside of the things that affirm their own beliefs, I think that when you create an environment of listening, that environment is transformative, and I'm not scared of what anybody wants to say in that environment. When there's no listening going on, then many things that people want to say can be incredibly destructive.
Thank you. So now we bring to a different component within this ecosystem, which is the role of women specifically. And the women make up 50% of the Palestinian society. I assume the same thing in the Israeli society. They are half the society, basically. And if we are only working with men, then it's kind of like a lame duck that cannot move forward because half of the society is not involved. And we usually hear that women are not involved in the peace-building process and not in the political process. Is that an assumption, Nida, or is it true?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for the invite. I think it's not a surprise that women are almost entirely absent from peace negotiations, from deliberations, let it be direct or indirect. But again, I don't want to go into the reasons. The reasons vary. But I think, the very fact that up until now we're discussing whether women should be part of negotiation, should be part of policy making and decision making is the key issue. Once we stop this and the realization that women they have to be part of any decision making, not only in the peace negotiations, then we will see it change. But right now, there's no change in the way that, unfortunately, male leaders look at the role of women and the way they could contribute to a sustainable peace and resolution. We've been talking about sustainable solutions, and there's no way we can reach a sustainable solution or resolution without involving women. And it's not about women, it's about involving, bringing more and more voices, diverse voices. So same way within Israel, there was a realization just recently that you have to involve Palestinian in the workforce, that it's actually enriches the workforce. It benefits the entire Israeli society. Same way, when it comes to security issues, when it comes to conflict resolution, and so on and so forth.
But if we do include women, does it make a difference? What is the difference that women make?
Yeah, well, I can speak in terms of theory, and I can speak about research and statistics and results. One thing is that in terms of sustainability, a peace agreement that is reached by involving women has a 35% chance of lasting 10 years or more, okay? So this is one thing. The other thing is, again, women bring, first, they're the ones who bear the bigger burden when it comes to conflict, when it comes to violent conflicts, their own safety, their mental and well-being. They're the ones who usually have to take care of the family, of the kids. So again, that's also they're the ones who fall behind when it comes to education, fulfilling or pursuing a career. All of that is on the shoulders of women. So, bearing that in mind, and bearing in mind that women are the ones who have to come up with solutions. Normally, women tend to think outside of the box. They have a more inclusive approach, trying to encompass everyone, make sure that no one is left behind. And this is something that we know also from the way women act within the family. It's like their traditional role. And this is something that's proven to be very efficient. Women have the capacity and the ability to reach out to certain actors that normally either the average male politician or policymaker doesn't have access to, especially if we're talking about conservative societies, and I can bring examples internationally, but also from within Israel and Palestine. Internationally, we know, for example, that the women in Northern Ireland were the only ones willing to talk with the so-called terrorists and, invite them, visit them in prison, hear their story and their narrative. So again, I can go on and on about, what benefits women can bring to negotiation table and sustainable resolution. But I think, the evidence is there everywhere. And, we can, even though within the Israeli context, women were not invited, but we know that the women have played a key role. We don't wait until someone invites us to the table. We come up with opportunities, we create the opportunities, we initiate. And we have examples with women wage peace and women in black, and we see there's
Women
evidence
of the
that,
Sun in
yeah,
Palestine
Women of
as
the
well.
Sun right now, but I'm also talking about past experiences and how, the pressure and the mobilization that these women, initiated affected actually the resolution of the conflict in Lebanon. So again, and there are more and more examples that we can discuss.
Can I be honest with you?
Just honest.
I'm a Palestinian woman.
Yeah.
I live in East Jerusalem. It's a different legal system because somehow it's within the framework of the Israeli system, but I cannot participate in the Israeli system because I'm not a citizen, I'm a resident. I cannot participate in the Palestinian politics either, maybe because I don't belong to any of the existing political parties, and because again, I live in Jerusalem. So as a Palestinian woman, also if I want to participate in any kind of a political debate or peace building, immediately I'm going to be tagged as a normalizer. Mm-hmm. How can we make sure, or what do you think the role is of organizations such as AllMap or the international community or even the local community into making sure that these women participate? What does it actually need to push women to take that step and stand up and say, no, I want a different situation?
Okay, now, as I said, and this is again may sound as a generalization, but most women don't need that push, okay? Sometimes they need a push in order to enter maybe some official channels. But, we have the capacity and the ability, again, to think outside the box, to think of initiatives, to try and work around the system, to create our own political opportunities. So again, you may not be welcomed on the Israeli side or the Palestinian official side, but I'm sure you can think of ways to, come together and do something. Again, I can maybe quote here the Colombian women. They were not invited to the negotiation table, and even though, the negotiations failed multiple times. And what they decided to do is that they started collecting testimonies of women about the effect of the conflict on their lives. How is that affecting them? And I think in a matter of 3 years, they managed to get, and excuse me if I'm not, maybe 5,000 testimonies, something like this. So again, we have role models to look up to, and we have other ways of trying to work around. Most of us here in this room, we work with minimal resources, okay? But we try to make the best out of it. And I can already say, as partner here, I have my partner, Nida Levy, who, again, we're leading the 1325 project at Itakh-Ma'aki. 1325, for those of you who don't know, is UN Security Council Resolution 1325 that calls for the involvement and participation of women on issues of peace and security. So, we learned from the Colombian example, and we started already collecting testimonies. And if I may, like, one of the things that we already did is collecting testimonies on the expulsion of the communities of Misafir Yatta and how is that affecting women and children. So we collected testimonies of women, and we tried to, discuss issues that are normally overlooked. We're not interested in numbers or statistics. We want to bring the human face to the conflict. We want to see how is this conflict actually affecting everyone? How is it affecting us on a daily basis? Okay, and we discussed, or like we talked about issues related from like education and like mental and psychological health, access to health services, so on and so forth. But we also touched upon issues like, the scarcity of dreams, that the women and children of Misafir Yatta, they don't have dreams. And that's something very dangerous, okay? When you reach that level of despair, you have nothing to lose. And this is something that we can't afford, getting to. So again, we started with Misafir Yatta, and I really call all of you to sign the petition to make the voices of the women of Misafir Yatta heard. But we're also continuing the work within the borders of Israel, and we have another project that we're working on in the Negev. And again, we're trying to look at, what are the consequences of house demolitions on women and children in the Negev, especially in the unrecognized villages. So again, we don't have a government that's willing to work with us or cooperate with us, but we have our ways. We can find a way to work and influence.
It seems for me that it's like women empowering women, women giving voice to women. Like we're not waiting for men or for the political systems.
Yeah, but it's more. Sorry, it's not only about women. Again, it's an inclusive voice. It's a feminist perception or a feminist attitude is an attitude that brings everyone in. We invite also men. Like just recently, Neta and I came back from a tour in the States, and we were amazed that so many men attended our events. And we would like to see the same also happening here in Israel and Palestine. So it's not about excluding men. No, it's working all of us together, all the forces together.
Thank you. Talking about inclusion. Thank you. Talking about inclusion. Mohammed, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So I actually wanted to ask you something. You're a Palestinian. You're a young man. And unfortunately, these days, we don't see many Palestinian young men or women, in this case, participate in the field of peace building. There's many challenges. One of them we've discussed thoroughly is around the notion of normalization, and this really is not helpful. It doesn't really bring a change. It doesn't end the occupation, etc., etc. So, as a young man, in the middle of this hopelessness, you decided to basically work in the field of peace building. And you're still working in this field, and you're still connected yourself as an alum of some of these programs. Why? Let's hear the secret from you.
First, Naveen, thank you for having me here with you. I just want to add that I currently still working in this domain. I currently serve as the program coordinator of a non-profit called the Palestinian Internship Program, where we match Palestinian graduates with interns in the Israeli high-tech system. So to answer your question, as I mentioned that I joined a lot of organizations 11 years ago, and as most Palestinians, unfortunately, we don't have many opportunities, or we don't have any opportunities, let's say. So we don't have the privilege to say that I want to join peace organization for peace, or to meet the others, or to build bridges. We join these kind of organization because this is the only opportunity that we have. It's the only opportunity for us to travel maybe, to get a permit, to get a job, an internship. We don't have this privilege thinking that I want to do something more in my life. And this is, I think, what most Palestinians think of, especially in the West Bank, because this is where I'm coming from, that they don't have much opportunities, so they're looking just for one opportunity or many opportunities. This is why you see like also some Palestinians joining many organizations and going from one to another because they want to do something in their life, but they just don't know where to start from. And this is, let's say, pre-joining the program. Then they join programs. Post-program, I think they're divided into different categories, let's say, where some of them continue doing their work, continue joining organization because they see the value on joining the organization, not because this is the only opportunity that they have. They see the value on their personal growth, on meeting others, on getting to know other people. Some, they just keep joining organization because also this is the only opportunity that they have. And maybe the rest would just step down in fear of normalization and being called out in their community. And I think it's our responsibility as individuals, as staff members of many organizations. And I would like to invite everyone to think with me of how could we support Palestinians before joining the organization and even more after joining the organization. Because as Mr. Mohammed mentioned here before that, when you go back home, whatever you have, it evaporates because you're going back to reality. And to elaborate on what Dr. Alick said, that being idealistic and realistic, also we don't have this privilege of being an idealist, because we have to be realists, because this is where we live. This is the reality that we live in. After finishing this program, we're going back to our reality in the West Bank, where there is occupation, where there is oppression, and we have to deal with it. And if we don't have enough support from our community, and if we don't have support, especially from the organization that we are with, then this is where we reach a cultural shock that, what am I doing? Am I normalizing or not? So this is an important work for all of the organizations that they need, not even to support Palestinians after they graduate. They need to support all of their members, all of their alumni, after they finish their program, on how to engage them back into their communities, how to bring them back into reality, let's say. And this is why I think it's conflicted between people on joining organizations or not.
So, if I ask you the same question, what is required from us to bring that support from the Palestinian community? What is it that we need to show the Palestinian community?
A simple question, a simple answer for your question is that we care. We care about them. We don't see them as participants that join. We don't see them as numbers joining our program and then months later or weeks later you're going back home. We need to show them that we care about you, we're here for you, we're supporting you, whether it is psychologically speaking or emotionally speaking. I think more organizations need to invest more in the alumni programs as well, because this is where people spread the word about the organization that they are in. So more support needs to come from this organization into these young Palestinians, because they're still trying to build their life, they're still trying to build their careers. And if they don't have the right mentor, if they don't have the right guidance, they will be lost, whether they are Palestinians or Israelis or internationals.
It's very important, I think, what you've mentioned, because at ALMEP we did make this realization a couple of years ago, and one of the pillar programs that we have at ALMEP is basically Alum Hub, which means creating this ecosystem for the alumni of the different projects, that they all the time feel that they are part of the field, that they belong somewhere, that they're not, alienated in their own community. But I'll have to say it's still very difficult and challenging.
It is very difficult. And this is actually some of the work that we try to do at the Palestinian Internship program, that we give them something tangible. We give them something that we could look forward to. They have work, they have money, they have families to sustain. So if you give them this, people would be committed to your program. If you give them sustainability, if you give them something that they really care about and something that is tangible for people with an internship or with a job offer or etc., this is how you make your people more committed to your cause. And this is where caring and looking out for them realize.
Yep, yeah.
I just want to, before moving into another thing, I just want to add to what Dr. Nida said. I think also, as you mentioned, it's not women empowering women, it's also women empowering men. I'm proud to say that I have 4 sisters. They are all older than me. In PIP, my colleagues are women. My mentor is a woman also. And I don't think I will be sitting here talking to you guys without the help I got from the women in my life, which is I'm super proud of. And
thank you.
So yeah, I've been empowered by a lot of amazing women in my life, and I'm forever grateful for them.
Yeah, it's also another call, I think, for another idea, which is to bring organizations to think together. Rather than having the competitive mentality in this ecosystem, like we're competing over funds, we're competing over grants, we're competing over people. Let us think together, how can we actually create the pipeline where one Palestinian, for example, starts with, at a very young age in a certain program, graduates and immediately goes to a different program and then basically find employment through the same field. And it's kind of like making sure that we are creating this strong ecosystem, but also that safe hub that you are not alone. And I think this would set an example for the Palestinian society specifically to show that this actually works. You know, why not? Let's give it a try. And then also starting to question this term of normalization and what is actually normalization. And speaking of that, there is another approach that is, if we're talking about the unusual suspects and what do we bring to the table and how we work together, religion, religious approaches, faith. Does it really divide people or bring people together? Yes, that's a question for you.
Religion does both. Religion does both. I think I've answered your question. Do you want me to carry on? I think the biggest question that we have to address is the difference between the role of religion in the Middle East and the way in which religion is understood in the West. There is a real profound difference because religion is public in the Middle Eastern context. And religion is central to the lives of too many people here in Israel and in Palestine. Religion is far too central in the lives of too many people for it not to be a factor in the peace effort. So the question isn't whether or not religion brings people together or religion brings people apart. Religion is not just another issue. It's like it's the prism through which a huge number of people look at the world and understand the conflict. And so it's not just a question, and I really want to make this clear because I think it's a critical issue. It's not just a question of whether or not we address religion as a whole list of themes, you know, stuff that we need to talk about when we try to think about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Religion is one of the fundamental prisms through which people in this region live their lives, see the world, understand themselves.
That's very true, very true.
And I think that if we treat it as another subject in a vertical graph, rather than one of the cross sections, it's something really big that we're going to miss. I'll add just one more piece to this. I don't know how much you want to talk about this, but if we're talking about building an ecosystem of peace and of people who are involved in peace, then in order to be realistic or idealistic about a future peace in this region, we have to include the people who have opposed peace most effectively and ardently in the past. I felt today, during the course of a lot of the sessions, that there was a tremendous amount of anger against the Israeli government. There's a tremendous amount of anger against the Israeli right wing. A tremendous amount of anger against the people who support the judicial reform. I felt that anger, I felt that resentment, I also felt them being, stereotyped and presented in a way that was a caricature of them rather than a true and serious understanding of who they are and what motivates them. If you're in, first of all, from a level of the heart, if you're in the peace business, you want to be in peace with people who you find difficult.
That's very true.
So that's the first. But on a second level, if you want to have some kind of a significant change take place in this region, if your strategy for that change is to define the majority of people as your enemy and as the obstacle to your success, I don't think you're going to get very far. So I want to apply that not just to people to the right wing, but to the vast majority of Israelis. And I mean this, the vast majority of Israelis, who are not necessarily religious, but for whom their Jewish identity is absolutely the primary way in which they think of themselves. To say that sidelining Jewish identity and the Jewish identity of the State of Israel is the way forward is, in my opinion, a huge strategic mistake. And I would say the same thing. I understand less and don't want to presume. But from the experience that I have, I would say the same thing about Palestinian society, and I'll let you affirm with a nod or a shake and tell me if that sounds fair. So religion is a key element in the conflict because it's a key element in Middle Eastern life. And it's a key element in the conflict because it's the dominant identity of the people who we tend to think of as the enemies of peace and have to be part of the peace effort. And if we want them to be part of the peace effort, we have to rethink how we go about making peace.
Yep. Thank you. Yes, of course you can respond. Or you can respond, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. No, I just wanted to say that, I think the risk is when religion becomes the framework. If it becomes the framework of this conflict, then that's not, what we want to get to. Because then we're moving from maybe a national colonial conflict to a religious conflict. And unfortunately, there are some civil society organizations that fall into that trap. And just recently, I talked with someone who's, they've been running a program for years and years. They're doing, very blessed efforts. But then when I asked, okay, so you have Jews, Muslims, and Christians, they said, no, we only have Jews and Muslims. So again, we have to be very, very careful, when we use the religion card. We can use it as a tool to bring people together, but not, we have to be careful to frame the conflict as such.
I want to add to that also, Alick. I think it's about how you frame it. And this conflict, as far as I understand, is about identity and territory. Identity is essential for people to express both territorially and in other aspects of their life. But we need to challenge the majority who live the lie that Israel is the democratic nation state of the Jewish people, because it's not. On both counts, it's a lie. Between the river and the sea, there is no longer a Jewish majority, and a majority of people living in this land do not enjoy democracy. So we can talk about identity, but we need to reframe how we express our identity in a way that provides equality for everyone who lives here. Not to preserve a reality of Jewish superiority, Jewish supremacy, which is what the majority of Israelis want. I don't want to go back to the democracy of yesterday, which was a lie. I want to create a new democracy in which people have the opportunity to express their identity on a territorial basis as well as a non-territorial basis, to preserve their identity, but not in a way that denies the legitimacy of the identity of the other people who live in this land. So yes, we need to talk about religion, and yes, we need to talk about identity, but we need to recognize the equality of the identity of everyone who lives here. Well, I'll have the mic. Can I say one more thing?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. One of the other lessons from the past that I wanted to share, in mid-2001, after the second Intifada broke out, and we were beginning to experience the wave of suicide bombings around the country and the horrific Israeli violence against the Palestinian people and the Palestinian Authority, the British government came to us and said, most of our joint Israeli-Palestinian programs are breaking down. They're ceasing to exist. We would like you to research the community. There wasn't ALMEP in this framework back then, but we want you to research the community and ask what's going on and how can the joint work between Israelis and Palestinians be preserved or continued during the times of acute violence. We organized a community-wide introspective research. We had hired 3 researchers, and we had 40 organizations, Israeli, Palestinian, and joint Israeli-Palestinian organizations in the research. When I think back to the research, the most striking result of what we found was the interviewees asked the people in the community, what was your strategy? What was the strategic thinking behind your activities? What we found was that most of the organizations that ceased being able to continue the work after the violence began couldn't answer the question. Not only that, 100% of the organizations who could answer the question continued their activities. They had a strategy. They had strategic thinking. They knew what they were doing and why they were doing it and how they were doing it. So when the acute violence erupted, they were able to adapt new methodologies, but their basic strategy of what they were trying to achieve remained the same. And I would say that's even more important today. If you're going into this work just out of goodwill and good nature and because it's the right thing to do, but you don't have strategic answers of what you're doing and how you're doing it, you are not going to succeed. You are probably not going to succeed. So I think it begins very much with sitting down and thinking really hard, what am I doing it? What am I doing? How am I doing it? Why am I doing it? What is my strategy?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it also fits perfectly into what Mr. Darawshe was talking about a little bit earlier about professionalizing the field as well. And as ALMEP, we also recognize that. That's why, for example, one of our programs is around scaling up the capacity of our members, but not only that, but to think strategically about what is the theory of change behind the work that we do, and what is the strategy, and where do we actually want to get at the end of the day. I wanted to ask you something, talking about the people that we don't usually include in our work, or we usually, kind of say, no, they're not like, or they're like not active, or what is their role? Usually we say that the Palestinians within Israeli citizenship don't have a role to play. And others say, no, there is a role to play. They are the bridge that bring the Palestinians and the Israelis together. From your perspective and experience, what is the role of a Palestinian within Israeli citizenship? How can we actually make use, maybe, if there is, of the role that they play? And what is that role?
Well, a bridge has a couple of interesting functions. One is something you step on, and that's not the role we want.
Exactly.
But a bridge also, if it's above the river, it needs to have 2 legs. One in the Israeli side and one on the Palestinian side. Mm-hmm. One in the Israeli side and one in the Arab side. And these 2 legs need to be strong legs. So we need to successfully engage in our Israeli story, and we need to successfully engage in our Palestinian Arab story. Mm-hmm. And as long as one of those is weak, we're not good enough for this. I think that the Palestinian Arab citizens in Israel are going through 2 interesting processes. One I would characterize as an Israelization process, and the other is re-Palestinization process. And I think these are 2 healthy processes that need to be strengthened so that you can really have this 2-legged bridge that can allow to play the function that needs to be played. And the function that needs to be played maybe not in what's called diplomacy level. Maybe we're not going to be the diplomats that will bring the Oslo III agreement, okay? Or maybe it's going to be Bahrain agreement, or God knows which kind of agreement. I see the ambassador here. But maybe that's not, maybe not track one diplomacy. But on track two diplomacy, we are square one. This is square one for track one diplomacy. When you now look at the medical industry, a third of the medical industry in Israel are Palestinian Arab citizens, 24% of the doctors, 35% of the nurses, 35% of the dentists, 45% of the nurses, 55% of the pharmacists. Israeli Jews cannot escape an Arab medical staff. That's true. All right, which is good. What does that do? It humanizes them. It creates interdependency. It creates cooperation. And slowly you can see that also the Arab citizens that are working there are beginning to develop a nucleus for a middle class that knows not only to give services to the Jews, but also to sit in Aroma and pay 20 shekels for a cup of coffee. Stupid price. But
one of the most expensive countries. What did you expect?
But the Israeli Jews get used that we are not just their servants and waiters, we're also equal to them sitting on the same table in the cafe. It creates a place to normalize in dignity the presence of the Palestinian, Arabs, Muslims in the shared space. I think that the Israelization process that the Palestinian Arab citizens are going through is not unique for them. They're making Israelization of the Israeli sphere in general. When you go to an Israeli hospital today, it's not coincidence that all the signs are in Arabic also. Why? Because the medical industry begins to respect the Arab identity and the Palestinian presence. When this is happening in universities. 20 years ago, the percentage of Arab students in Israeli universities was barely 3.5%. Today, it's 20%. The experience of an Israeli student going to a university today is a different experience. He has 20% Arab citizens who are studying with him. That most of them define themselves as proud Palestinians at the same time. They bring the identity of the Palestinians and legitimize it in the Israeli sphere. This is the normalization of the Arabs in the eyes of the Israelis. The normalization of Palestinians in the eyes of the Israelis. The normalization of Muslims in the eyes of the Israelis. You go to any shopping mall today. Most shops have Muslim women, mostly Arab citizens, with hijab, head cover. It normalizes their presence as legitimate part of the Israeli sphere, which I think...
Can I challenge you a little bit on that?
Just a couple more sentences. These dynamics are happening, I mentioned, in the medical industry. They're happening in the academia. They're happening in the high-tech industry. 23% of the engineering students today are Arab citizens. In the high-tech industry, we increased from 1% 7 years ago to 7% today. And 23% of the engineering students are going to challenge the high-tech industry with the brain power and the capacity to say, we're here and we're available. The question is, can we create capacity in the Palestinian and the Arab world? And that is also happening. At the same time that one of my daughters is doing her PhD in genetics at the Technion, and she is going through the genetic biomedical field in the Israeli high-tech biomedical industry, creating contacts there. My other daughter is in her third year of dentistry at Jenin University, creating her Palestinian strength and Palestinian. We know how to live the dual identity that gives us a capacity that average Israeli Jew does not have, and average Palestinian, average Arab in the Arab world does not have. Now, in building this capacity, you need to bring it to practical life. So in the past, Ahmad Tibi played the role between Rabin and both the late Rabin and late Yasser Arafat. I don't think the political conditions allow this to happen today. The reality doesn't work. But if we would have maybe a center-left government, maybe an Arab member of the Knesset can play that role. One, they need to take it on themselves. So they need to be willing to do that, but you need a Palestinian willing partner on the other side and an Israeli willing partner to engage in the peace process. We cannot be the peacemakers. We can probably be the square one for social economic normalization between people, breaking stereotypes and humanizing the other side. But I think we are mostly the peace protectors because we can be spoilers for peace.
Can I add something to that? Because you said like basically
And you wanted to challenge also.
humanizing. Yeah, it's a kind of a challenge. To basically, when you said like humanizing the Palestinians, the Arab Palestinian. For example, when I talk to different Israeli Jewish groups, the first thing they tell me, you're the first Palestinian whom we meet. And I'm like, exactly, you showed the statistics. Yeah. Like in the mind of the average Israeli Jewish person, the Arab that lives in Israel is not a Palestinian. There is a disconnect of identity, of the Palestinian identity. There is a misunderstanding of the Palestinian identity. And I think, Nida, you wanted to say something, if possible. Or you want to respond to that first?
If you wanted to challenge me, then challenge me.
Challenge accepted.
You know, redefining ourselves as Palestinians is something that evolved mostly after Oslo agreements. When identifying yourself as Palestinian became legal, because until then it was considered illegal. Being Palestinian meant that you side with the Palestinian terror movement and all that stuff. And suddenly the Palestinian flag became legal, and we started daring to define them ourselves as Palestinian. Before that, it was defining in secret. And I think this is a new evolution of identity, the re-Palestinization process. It's a re-evolution of identity that maybe not all Israelis have been exposed to that side of our identity. By the way, almost 65% of Arab citizens in Israel include the term Palestinian self-identification, not as sole identity. I mean, you define yourself solely as Palestinian. We are mostly hyphenated identities. Palestinian citizens of Israel, Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. We have more mix, or 48 Palestinians, but we have, by the way, Professor Tamar Herman has a study. It has 17 different variations of how we define ourselves. 17 different
variations. Is that on its own a challenge?
11 of them are hyphenated identities, and only 6 of them are singular identities. So I think that it's only recent, for example, that the dean of the law school at the Hebrew University, Mikhail Kriani, is a Palestinian Arab citizen. It's only recent that the chairman of Bank Leumi is a Palestinian Arab citizen. It's only recent that the head of the nanotechnology department at the Technion is a Palestinian Arab citizen. So give this some time. I mean, social change takes time. The presence of these icons of success. In the past, we only counted on, soccer players. Now we have superstars who are in high places. And I think with time, the more icons of success like this that we have, I think we will challenge the Israeli mindset and perspective of the presence of actually Israelis being part of the Middle East and not just being part of Europe.
Thank you. Nida, do you want to comment?
Yeah, maybe I have a more critical point of view when it comes to, first I think, in recent years, the word bridges has become a curse word. Like many Palestinians don't consider themselves as bridge. They don't want to be a bridge. They're very busy in, determining their identity, strengthening their identity. They're more daring. So that's why, for example, you hear more the discourse or talking about Palestinians, like, within Itakh-Ma'aki, we still have this debate because before it was like a Jewish Arab organization, and now we're insisting that it has to be Jewish Palestinian organization. Okay, so again, I think, Palestinians are less willing to compromise now. They're more daring, and even like the achievements that you've just mentioned, and some of them are, they are quite achievements. But again, you can see like doctors in Israeli hospitals, but you don't see them in high ranks and at the health ministry, for example. So it's more because there's a need within the Israeli society for these services. Same way in high tech, and high tech also, like you see like the more they don't have like senior maybe, okay? So it's more of a minor jobs. Also like in universities, I'm an academic and I've been struggling, and I know a lot of academics like me, the percentage of tenure track academics, Palestinian academics in Israeli society, I think is less than 2%. Okay? So again, like, and the chances that someone would be hired and becomes part of, you know, the staff on a tenure track, especially if they're dealing with political issues and they're really outspoken, are very minor. I even have, like, you know, Jewish Israeli friends who've been either kicked out or, you know, moved to other universities or colleges because, you know, the views that they bring are very critical. I won't say extreme, but critical. So again, I don't see that there's that progress, that we made that progress, but I think that everything that we managed to achieve is because that we worked really hard. That's one thing. And the other thing is because there's either a demand within the Israeli society or some kind of a shortage in service providers.
Thank you, Nida. One last question to Dr. Gershon specifically before I wrap up this discussion. I'm going to mention the H word, Hamas. Should we or should we not be engaging Hamas in negotiations and in a political process and in elections within the Palestinian community?
100% yes. There's no
Elaborate.
question about it. Hamas is part of Palestinian society, whether we like it or not. The reality of the existence of Hamas is there. The government of Israel related to Hamas in the last 2 wars in Gaza as the sovereign power in Gaza. The challenge of Hamas, there's a great book, by the way, written by Tarek Barkoni, I think his name is, a Palestinian scholar who researched Hamas. I forgot what it's called, but it's a really great book. I recommend reading it. Hamas has gone through a process over the last 2 decades because of the burden of governance. Hamas is not just an ideological organization dedicated to the destruction of Israel. Hamas is the government in Gaza and needs to provide services to more than 2.5 million people living there. The burden of Hamas,
Sir, thank you very much, sir. But
I'll answer you. The burden of governance. Thank you. I heard you. We heard you. I'll answer you. The burden of governance on Hamas has created a process over the last 2 decades, especially in the last decade, of becoming more and more pragmatic. Hamas changed its covenant at the pressure of Egypt. Hamas is dependent on Egypt as well. Its economy in Gaza is becoming more and more dependent on Egypt, and Egypt is applying a lot of pressure on Hamas. There's a top delegation of Hamas leadership and Islamic Jihad leadership in Cairo now that the Egyptians told them to come, and they're there now, and they're trying to figure out some kind of negotiated arrangement for a long-term hudna, or ceasefire, that includes a prisoner deal. The bodies of 2 Israeli soldiers and 2 Israeli civilians are in Gaza for 8 years now, and those negotiations have progressed somewhat, but not enough to make a deal. A deal has to be made. I mean, these people have to come home. But we also have to recognize that Israel is holding hundreds of Palestinian bodies, hundreds of Palestinian bodies of Palestinians who were killed by Israeli soldiers or by Israeli settlers, non-combatants, including combatants. The government of Israel has used state terrorism against the people of Gaza, who have no shelters and safe rooms to run to when Israel bombs indiscriminately and kills innocent women and children and non-combatants in Gaza. There is an equalization of a motivation to kill each other, and we need to change that dynamic, and the way that you do that is by talking. And you have to talk to everyone, including Hamas. It's not easy, because as much as we don't want to talk to them, they don't want to talk to us. And believe me, every single week over the last 15 years, I speak to people in Hamas. Every single week, including this morning. And it is tough, but we have to insist. This is one of the lessons that we should learn from Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is not a perfect, ideal situation, but one of the reasons why Northern Ireland worked and continues to work is because the people who negotiated make sure that everyone was at the table. Everyone, from all the groups, those that supported the peace process and those that were against the peace process. We need to do the same thing here that regards the right-wing, fanatic, messianic Jews and Hamas and Islamic Jihad. We have to make sure that everyone is in the room and we're talking to everyone.
Thank you. So I was given the cue that was the end of our session. Again, I'm humbled by the level of discussion and thoughtfulness and thought leadership that was created here. Thank you so much for your ideas. And I encourage the audience to reach out to the panelists if you have any questions or further discussions with them. Thank you so much for listening and your attendance for this. Thank you. The last session is going soon. Yes, please, the Masafer Yatta petition is here as well for you to sign. An act of activism in our conference. When is the second session? Let me announce it.
The third session is...
Now it's 3:30 already.
Let's say 3:40, because they're here.
So the next session is going to start in 10 minutes. If you want to grab something, the last and final session is in 10 minutes. Thank you so much.